vor. Now that's a completely different thing.
Not vor.
No, state vor.
Please, not
No.
vor. Hello, everyone, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans?
Yes, it is me, your non-binary Flint, and with me are the wonderful
Ashleigh, hello.
And I'm Alex. Hi. Hi.
And how are you all doing today?
So it is a partner's birthday week. So we've been doing, fun stuff. So we've had a couple of nice meals. Went off to Chester Zoo yesterday.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was really fancy. I've spoken about this a little bit before we started recording, but I'm going to repeat it again for the benefit of the audience. I saw the giraffes right up close, and it was really cool. But they've got such long tongues, man.
Yeah.
Not like the length of their neck, because that would truly be insane. But, they've got the same number of bones in their neck as a human does, which is also just an astonishing fact when you think about it.
Yeah.
But they came out with the treats, and all the giraffes came sort of semi-running over to where the treats are distributed and kind of pushing each other out of the way and everything. So I also bought a hand puppet of a snow leopard and have been sooty and sweeping with it. Since on the train on the way home, I was like, he was whispering in my ear and whatever. And also I sneakily put it on my hand just before Lexi got into bed next to me, because she always cuddles up to me and goes, "Hi, honey bunny." And so then I immediately just brought out the puppet and goes, "Hello, boys and girls." So it was not a sexy thing to do, but I will contend that it was very funny. So
Yeah.
How about you, Alex? What's new? What's shaking?
I've been doing good. I was supposed to make a smooth segue. I saw some elephants today, recently last weekend, but not in a zoo. I went to see Oliphants at a Lord of the Rings in concert at Royal Albert Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You sent pictures. So what was that like as an experience?
It was a very interesting sonical experience, as you'd say. When you're watching the movies, it's complete. When you've just got an orchestra live in front of you, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Because you can hear different nuances in the soundtrack that you don't really get when it's pre-canned either at the cinema or when you're watching it at home on the telly. The only time I've ever seen it has been on the telly because I was too young to watch it as a kid. Sorry to the listeners out there who are a bit too...
Yeah, I've just politely aged to dust. Thanks for that, because I did see them at the cinema.
But yeah, and also it had a whole live choir there as well.
Cool.
Occasionally you get these soloists. You had the female soloists doing the really high-pitched bits.
Yeah.
And God bless the kid who had to sing in front of the Royal Albert Hall just on his own with the really high-pitched. The kid was a tiny bit out of tune, but I can't blame him at all for that. And the kid got the loudest applause, so I think they got recognised a bit for that.
I mean, for sure.
I've actually seen an orchestra once before as well, a proper one with a choir and everything, because my granddad was in a choir. So I must have been about 13 or so. It was nothing anywhere near as grand as the Royal Albert Hall, mind. But they did Verdi's Requiem, which if you know it is if you don't know it is the one that goes bum ba-dum 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 bum ba da 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 da.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's fucking beautiful. And I'm sure that Amber will put in a much better rendition there.
No, I don't think I will.
No, we don't need that now. I think Flint did a brilliant enough job
don't need
it.
Nailed it.
And because I was I was fairly young. I remember, because it starts so slow and so kind of gentle, I genuinely started to fall asleep, and so I woke up. I shit you not, I woke up when the first was bang! And I was what? And this old woman next to me started giggling a bit because it was classic.
The old orchestral jump scare.
Yeah.
For real.
Manchester's got the Bridgewater Hall. Lots of classical stuff goes on there. And there's a thing that's happening this September that I've booked to go and watch, which is Sir Carl Jenkins conducting a 25-year anniversary performance of his piece, A Mass for Peace, which is just fucking lovely. And there's a choir in that as well. So I'm just looking forward to this huge literal sonic assault, because it represents a war and a fight. And there's a section where the choir sings about the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, and it ends with them singing, "They breathed their last as living torches." Ooh. And it's, like spine-chilling stuff. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And I'm glad I booked tickets when I did, because I think they've all gone. So yes, when it comes to orchestral stuff, next time you're in Manchester, let's check out the Bridgewater Hall. However, we've got some other stuff to check out, haven't we?
Yes. Although, a fun little segue. One other thing that I've been up to recently, and it's not been because of what we're going to be doing in this episode, but it's just been really funnily timed. I have been binging Ted Lasso like it's the last TV show left on Earth. And it's so good. I love and adore it. Me and Owen joke that it is deprogramming toxic masculine men. I've been loving it so much. The comedy's so good. And yeah, that, and it's also my birthday weekend this week.
Okay. Happy birthday in advance.
Yeah,
happy birthday.
I'm going to be the big 3-0, which is not terrifying at all.
But now I'm turning 30.
If we can get a little sting of Bo Burnham's I'm turning 30, that'd be hilarious.
No.
Oh God, I'm dreading it, and I'm only 5 years away.
For real, though, the second the 25 hit, I started to be like, oh God, 30's around the corner. It's 5 years away, calm down. Like, and then the closer I got to it, the more I was like, I'm actually not that bothered. It's fine. Aging is normal. It's okay. We're humans. It's going to happen.
We all do it. We all do it.
Yeah, sometimes it just feels a little bit more real than other moments, you know?
Yes. Like when I turned 40, that was like, oh God, that's it. Because I remember my parents saying to me, and I promise we'll get on with the show properly in a minute, but I remember my parents saying to me that, time starts to go a lot quicker when you get older. The years just go past quicker and quicker. And I was like, don't be daft. They're going to feel the same length, like all the time. It's a year, right? How is it possibly going to feel any different? They were right. Mm-hmm. Because, a few weeks ago I was 35, I'm sure, but, Oh,
the old, long, unrelenting march towards aging. You can't stop. Talking of things fuck it. I was trying to do a good segue. That fucked up.
It's all right. Okay, yeah. Let's do it, shall we? And I think it's appropriate that somebody more involved in it should do this intro. So that's me saying you two deal with it.
Okay. So the reason why Ted Lasso is quite funnily relevant for this episode is that we're going to be doing a sports special, in case you haven't noticed the thumbnail or,
Yeah.
The title isn't exactly lined towards sports, so it makes sense if you're a little bit like, whoa. But to kick off this cross-continent endurance marathon, we want to also let you know that this is going to be structured very differently from how we normally do things. Instead of having a handful of the latest news stories, we've spent the last year monitoring and researching trans sports and sports science. Now, we have a really cool interview coming up as usual, but we think that the best way to showcase what we've learned both from our interviewees and our research is to lay the foundation of what the climate is like in the real world first, because some of this is going to get pretty theoretical. Consider a dinner before breakfast. To that end, the stories we've picked are specifically sports-orientated. Before that, though, let's take a moment to acknowledge where sports fits into the wider picture of trans rights as our community sees it. It's obviously something that we should fight for. It's generally something that we all agree on. Trans inclusion should be happening. But how many people actually consider it an immediate priority? As we are all gathering here at the first ribbon, ready for the starting gun to go off, let's take a look at what some of our fellow runners think. Alex had the idea of polling our audience to get an immediate reference point. Now, obviously, we aren't going to generalize outside of that. We can't. But we had a feeling that sports would appear lower in priorities than some others, mainly because Well, the situation for us is so multivariously fucked right now. So we asked our Discord members what they felt were the top 5 priorities that trans activism should focus on at the minute. There were 11 to pick from, and in fact, our little experiment kind of paid off. It showed what we anticipated. With 124 responses overall, sports was dead last, with only 2.9%. That's 15 votes. Now, for the curious, the gold goes to healthcare for trans youth at 18.1%, with adult healthcare catching silver at 17.7%, which shows that the Discord community is putting trans youth healthcare above their own, and hopefully that's reassuring to any trans kids who happen to listen. Bronze is the fight against the EHRC guidance of 15.6%. Meanwhile, sports is at the bottom with digital ID, which only got 3 votes more, and raising visibility through pride was third from bottom, got almost double the votes that sports did. Now, we wouldn't want to spend too long speculating the reasons why. Frankly, we didn't ask. Any of them likely would be understandable. Basic access to care is in question. Sport is considered a leisure at the end of the day, even if we all agree that it should be trans-inclusive and is something to fight for. But listen, if you'll forgive us the boldness of making an episode on a subject our audience told us is less what they're interested in right now, trust us that we chose to do this for good reason. And because now I have a bit of a theory in my mind. All right, that does feel too grand. Let's call it sticky thoughts for now. But it'll only make sense if we start at the beginning. So, I hope you've carb loaded last night and hydrated this morning. Thankfully, for the change of verse, the first news story is going to be overseas.
We're also time hopping here too, because this next story is about a policy change announced by the International Olympic Committee back in March. We knew we were working on this sports episode, so we thought it would work in better context here than a couple episodes back. The International Olympic Committee, or IOC, has announced it will be introducing mandatory sex testing as part of its new policy for protecting the female women's category. All athletes wishing to compete as women at the Olympic level will now have to undergo an SRY gene test to determine their eligibility. And no, it's not called SRY by ways of an apology. It's because the test is to see if you have a SRY gene or not, which they consider fixed throughout life and therefore will use that to sort athletes into what they consider appropriate categories. There's a lot of problems and criticisms that stem from a policy like this, and we'll engage with some of those. We're doing a sports special after all. But at its root, this policy is discriminatory. It polices womanhood and it perpetuates stigma against trans and intersex people. That's never going to be a good way to implement this. With that in mind, let's talk about some specific problems. The head of the Olympic Committee, Kirsty Coventry, ran for her current position on the basis that she would enact a ban like this, which does draw into question the extent to which the IOC is following the science or just making a political choice. Speaking of which, despite the IOC insisting the policy is based on science, it has refused to share any of the science it's relying upon. The scientists involved are all secret, and the IOC has not published any bibliography. So, speaking of the super top secret, totally real expert-made bibliography, I just got to share this comment by the IOC's Director of Health, Medicine and Science.
I think from a perspective of your first question about a bibliography, so as extensive research has been done by many of the experts within the expert group, and from a perspective of the wide-ranging bibliography that is there, that does exist. Whether it will be published, it's not certainly published as part of the policy, but we do have that bibliography.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
In all seriousness, I doubt a dog ate their bibliography, but it raises obvious immediate concerns about whether it would hold up to any public scrutiny. We can't comment on what quality of evidence they have, as we don't know, nor do we know how they are engaging with any evidence. We also don't know if they are ignoring any evidence, and it's all a mystery. But for some as yet unknown reason, they are curiously tight-lipped on it, which is exactly the kind of move you make when you want to appear confident and garner trust on an international scale. Meanwhile, scientists who will go on record, like Andrew Sinclair, who discovered the SRY gene, are opposed to using the SRY test as a way to discriminate against athletes. And doing this kind of testing is illegal in some countries, like France. The IOC is still working out how to solve that, but is considering testing French athletes on site at foreign events. Although marketed as a once-in-a-lifetime screening, the policy allows for athletes to be screened again if doubts arise. One might worry that the selection for rescreening might itself be another avenue for discrimination. Athletes who refuse a screening or refuse any possible additional tests will be ineligible. There's something of an institutional power imbalance here. Complying is voluntary, but failure to do so means the end of an athlete's career. A power imbalance that only grows when you remember how young some Olympians are. There's pre-teens competing. So all in all, it's a discriminatory, coercive, legally dubious policy based on evidence we're not allowed to see. Wouldn't it be nice if someone in charge cared about science or inclusion or ethics as much as they cared about protecting female or women's category in sport?
It's infuriating because it's specifically to do with what the health, medicine and science director has said. The wide-ranging bibliography that is there, that does exist, it definitely exists, you guys. Trust me, bro.
It's giving my girlfriend who lives in Canada.
Yes, 100%. So, yeah, this story surfaced a little while ago. We thought we would table it until this episode. What do you think about this one, Flint?
So I think that this is first and foremost likely going to affect cis women overall, the vast majority. It's more about policing womanhood than it is about protecting fairness in sports. If we wanted fairness in sports, then maybe we would have more mixed categories. I don't know, just a thought. Maybe the boys would be able to handle a challenge. I would have thought so.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
So yeah, but I think that it's so problematic for so many reasons. It is fundamentally tied to eugenics. It's literally gene testing. There is no, even though, I'm sure they'd argue we aren't bringing that kind of worth scale into it. It's like, that's not the point though. I cannot in any way comment on how good the science is because they haven't supplied it. And that's a sign of poor science in and of itself. Personally, in my opinion, if you're not willing to show your sources, then how am I meant to trust your argument? So, it feels shady. It looks shady. Gonna say it's shady.
Yeah, agreed. And particularly with Andrew Sinclair, the discoverer, has said, no, this is a bad idea. Don't do this. It's just going to discriminate against athletes. I think that says a lot. And the fact that specifically is being ignored.
It also as well, It also, we've already seen that these rules, whenever we've had kind of like hormone testing and things like that, rules come in place, it's often been used in a way that to me looks like it's discriminatory towards women of color. And that is a consistent issue. And, this is again, we construct what womanhood is. So whenever we create a test of womanhood, that construction is going to be used as a measuring stick. There's no way you can't inherently pull into it the notion of worth as a woman, because if it didn't matter, you wouldn't be testing for it.
No, exactly. I doubt any trans people be going to the American Olympics anyway, because who would want to go to America in this moment anyway?
Or if they are, they may not transition yet. You know what I mean? That's the thing. There's going to potentially be a few trans athletes who may even know that they're trans, but they perhaps don't feel safe enough to even come out and would rather do that at the end of their career rather than get involved in all of this.
It sounds like they made up the policy, then was like, once we've got fudged together some evidence after we've announced it, we'll give it to you afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, it's Kirsty Coventry, isn't it? Who's kind of steering this. So she said, elect me, put me in position, and I will bring this in. So that's immediately not basing it in science. That's immediately just, as you said there, Alex, it's just making a political choice.
Yeah, it's sort of a lot of parallels to things like the puberty blocker ban and everything like that, because they're using false made up science to justify their policies.
Indeed. On the subject of which, then, people making up a policy based on nothing and using it to discriminate against people.
Ooh.
Our next stretch of track brings us back to the UK. And indeed, This is a story that's been trotting around the news stories for most of the last week, so let's talk about the major players. Parkrun is a regular community event that takes place all over the country and, as the name suggests, it's where people gather to run. It's where people gather together to go for a run, or indeed a fast walk, around a park local to where they live. It tends to be 5k for adults and 2k for the under 14s. It's relatively informal, and on the very first page of its website, it is described thus, quote, Parkrun is positive, welcoming, and inclusive, so there is no time limit and no one finishes last. Everyone is welcome to come along. Sounds wholesome, right? A space for people of all abilities, body types, and experience levels to come along on a Saturday morning and get active, get some exercise, and literally touch some grass when taking a well-earned sit down after the run. So now, let's introduce the villain of our story. The ADF. Yes, the American Conservative Christian Organization, the ADF, who were instrumental in overturning the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that stripped the legal right to abortion in the US. The ADF, who have been funding groups like Transgender Trend and the LGBT Alliance and other AstroTurf groups in the UK for several years now. That ADF has entered the game. They have piped up by issuing a legal threat against Parkrun UK over the fact that they allow trans people to participate in their, again, informal, non-competitive events. They claim that by letting trans people in, they are not complying with the well-worn Supreme Court ruling from last year. Worth saying as well, this is not just the ADF, they have partnered in this with former sports personality and Badenoch-nominated Tory peer Sharon Davis's Women's Sports Union, and that Parkrun are not the only sporting body that have been threatened in the same way. A total of 10 have received the same missive from the ADF, including the Royal Yachting Association, British Gymnastics, the Football Association of Wales, and a number of others, including 2 baseball associations that I wasn't aware we even had over here.
Baseball!
Obviously, a number of LGBTQ+ groups have issued statements in the wake of the ADF's announcement, including the Trans Solidarity Alliance, whose director, Alex Palmer-Yee, said in a statement, quote, National institutions like Parkrun are being attacked by the religious right because Labour is hanging them out to dry. Organisations need confidence to defend their trans-inclusive positions, but despite claims of clarity, the legal landscape after the Supreme Court judgment has become chaotic. Expensive threats like this will continue, and organisations like Girl Guiding and Women's Institute will continue to be harmed by anti-trans lawfare unless Labour acts to protect them. Trans people deserve to be able to take part in public life as themselves, and organisations like the ADF may not be going after trans people in the UK now, but they will not stop here. We know their role in campaigning against abortion rights, against gay marriage, and other vital human rights, and that is the crux of it. Now, for the good news. More than 2,100 park runners have contacted their respective MPs, imploring them to defend inclusive community spaces like Parkrun from anti-trans lawfare and, ideally, clear up the absolute mess of policy up and down the country after that Supreme Court ruling. There are more park runners joining this backlash with each passing day, so if you're a part of this or you know somebody who is, it is time to get involved and protect your space from literal Christo-fascists. Stay tuned for some ideas on how you can do this, coming up towards the end of the episode.
Yes, it's quite interesting how, of all the things that the ADF have decided to hop over the pond from to here, they chose sports specifically as well. Like this is the place they want to rear their ugly heads in.
They've got a theory for why that is, which is they think they've seen a crack in the dam. They think it's an open door. And if they think that, it might be true, is the thing. Because, as we spoke about earlier on, with that just basic poll that we did in our Discord, which is not representative, couldn't possibly be, but if that's how the community feels about it at large, the ADF have perhaps seen that, no one's defending it, no one's going to stand up for it, this is a fight we can win.
Maybe it's something where they can find out they've miscalculated. Could be a blind spot.
Fingers crossed, yeah. And I really do have to say, everyone's focusing on Parkrun. The news coverage has almost exclusively been about Parkrun, but the other, the more competitive sports organizations like the Yachting Federation, etc., they shouldn't be left out of the story. This is the ADF flexing their muscles and trying a very scattergun approach to lawfare by sending this missive to 10 different organizations. Because they're not going to stop with those 10, right? They're probably just drawing up a list for who the next ones are going to be.
No, exactly. And just because they're competitive doesn't mean there's less reason to defend those ones as well. That's what I've always had the feelings of when I saw that the gigantic focus on the Parkrun as well.
I think that the reason why Parkrun has gotten the most attention has been in part because there's been the most community response. And also, from what I understand, it's the most overtly queer. So they aren't changing any of their priorities or tactics per se. They're just taking it to a less watched area. And they're still doing their same shit that they always do. It is interesting to me how they have suddenly decided to become a fish with legs, coming over here and starting fucking, mixing up shit, stirring the pot. It's so much more sinister than it looks, right?
Yes.
To me, it feels like it's so much more sinister because of who it is and what they're capable of. And there is, I think we're seeing another wave of that kind of let's try them on this angle. Again, a few months ago, we were so much more focused on healthcare. We were so much more focused on, so many more of the conversations were about employment tribunals, especially around hospitals and things like that. This is another wave. Because before that, we were seeing it all based around children. So we see how we're getting further and further away into the different areas of life. And it feels like they're throwing away around. It's so great that there's been such a response. And that's kind of the thing. It's only, I think they're hoping for a domino effect, ironically enough, for how much that scared Americans a few decades ago. So
they're thinking that they can just play the same playbook and think we haven't read it ourselves.
Yeah, I say Americans, I mean the American government at the time, McCarthyism, all that.
I was going to say, you mean the CIA, don't you, really?
CIA, that's what it is. That's what it is.
That's my 2 cents on Parkrun and the ADF. They're not going to stop, is the thing, and the big community response from Parkrun needs to be replicated wherever else they rear their ugly Hydra-esque heads. However, let's get chunky.
Yes, because as we are finishing up on the last leg now of this race, we want to ensure that you are taking in the full scenery as we cross the finish line. Our first 2 stories helped with that aim, but the current state of the UK is something we've not been as thorough on. So let's catch that up to speed and see if we can't get a sprint going in the final paces. Ironically enough, to do that, we're going to have to start by talking about 2 of the sports that probably require you to move the slowest out of likely any other, really. Pool and darts.
It's time to get good at darts. I've always wanted to, but never wanted to work hard at getting good. Just like bowling and chess, I want the skill, but have no willpower to do all the rest.
Let us just grab our drinks of choice. What are you 2 getting, by the way?
Vimto?
And for you?
Oh, I'll have a gin and tonic, please, darling.
Fantastic. Those 2, and I'll have a snake bite and black, please.
Coming right up.
We are here because pool has become one of the most unlikely battlegrounds for trans exclusion in sports at the minute, considering how non-contact and non-physical it is. But then again, in some ways it's the most likely, because it's one of the pub games, right? And the closer to a pub a sport gets, the more men feel like they own it. So, if you don't know, last April, the English Black Ball Pool Federation, which I will now whimsily reduce to EP155 because it befits their absurd actions, moved to ban trans women from all of its women's tournaments with the Supreme Court as the reasoning. Harriet Haynes, a professional pool player, took them to court last year, and in August of 2025, she lost. However, she filed for appeal, and in April of this year, the court granted said appeal, which specifically was on the grounds that the court failed to properly consider her Article 8 rights to privacy and Article 14 right to ensure all rights are protected, and these are both under the European Convention for Human Rights, alongside other grounds relating to Section 13 of the Equalities Act, which relates much more directly to discrimination. Meanwhile, in the darts space, the Darts Regulation Authority, which basically is, the governing body for all of darts, has decided to ban trans women from all of its tournaments too, citing Harriet Haynes' ongoing legal challenge and the Supreme Court. This has effectively retired at least one darts competitor who we have mentioned at some point on a previous episode, Noah Lynn van Leuven, who was the first trans woman to play in the PDC World Championship and called it a retirement herself, but she has made it very clear that she is not done fighting for inclusion in the sport. While she can still compete in open tournaments, which would include, like, the PDC World Championship, she is effectively blocked out of it because so many of the competitions, which are a lifeblood for so many during the seasons leading up to the championship, and your performance in those tournaments is what gets you to the big stages. So, there's those two, and putting that into the context of Parkrun being under threat as well as prospective athletes for the Olympics having to prepare to be gene tested, it's safe to say that the walls are circling, dare I say, closing in a bit. This is where we will now welcome the voices of the wonderful Sheree Bekker and Stephen Mumford, who are undertaking the vital work to tackle this ongoing descent into bioessentialist babble. They even wrote a book called Open Play, A Case for Feminist Sport. We'll let them get into it while we finish these drinks, and then after, I'm going to explore some ideas and finally get around to explaining the title of this episode if you haven't figured it out already. So sorry for burying the lead on that one. Anyway, take it away. Interview. Yeah.
All right, I'm with Stephen Mumford, he, him, and Sheree Bekker, she, her. Thank you for joining us today. Please let the folks at home know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, hello. Thank you so much for having us today. So as you said, my name is Sheree Bekker, pronouns she, her. I am a senior lecturer at the University of Bath. I work in the Department for Health, and I am a co-director of the Feminist Sport Lab alongside Stephen Mumford.
Yeah, hi, Stephen Mumford, pronouns he, him. I'm a professor of philosophy at Durham University, and among other things, I've worked in philosophy of sport for a couple of decades.
Amazing. And it's great to have you here. Really excited to hear a lot about sports from expert perspectives. One of the biggest phrases, or the big phrase really, that comes out of a lot of people's mouths when it comes to trans sports, especially trans folks' mouths, is biological advantage. So let's maybe start there. How do you understand that term and its place in sports science and philosophy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I agree with you. We hear this word biological quite a lot being used, and I think this is a word that's used because it sounds extremely scientific, and it sounds like, we have done the work in understanding human physical advantage and so on. But Stephen and I, in our work, would like to, I think, challenge the use of that word and that phrase biological advantage a little bit, because we know that sport and sports performance has all sorts of advantages tied to it. So not only necessarily biological, that's one part of it. We do sport with our bodies. But sport is also played in societies, in communities. And so there are all sorts of other kinds of advantages that come up when we're talking about sport as well. So who has access to sport in the first place? And I'm sure that will come up a lot in this conversation. Whose sport is safe for and whose sport is accessible for. The money that it takes to participate in sport and the time and so on that it takes to participate in sport. So sport really, and being able to have an advantage in sport, really is made up of lots of different things, not only what our bodies can and maybe can't do, but also, as I say, the access and so on. So I'll start us off there. We might get back to biological advantage, but I'll just start by putting that on the table.
Yes, you're right. Biological is maybe just one dimension where there could be advantage. I'm sure that the most powerful advantage in sports is financial. If you look at Olympic medal tables, it's the rich countries that dominate. And so when we start getting into conversations of fairness, that's something that is never talked about. That's the key thing if you're looking for a level playing field. But the other thing, the most significant thing from our point of view, as Sheree said in the introduction, where we co-direct the Feminist Sport Lab. So we look at these questions from a feminist perspective. And if you read the literature in the feminist lineage, you can see one really strong theme is about not reducing women in particular down to their biology. So if you take Simone de Beauvoir, for instance, one of the most famous feminist writers, she starts off by saying that woman is not her body. She says that she draws this distinction between female and male, which she says is a biological category. And I think you could quibble with that, but one thing I wouldn't quibble with is that she sees woman as that's definitely not a biological category. She says it's an ideological category. It's like a cultural category. So that's I think a key thing in this is not reducing us down to just our bodies anyway. It's our whole experience we have of the world, our situation that's the key determinant of how we are.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, so we know that from the time that we're born, and nowadays even from the time that we're before we're even born, we are assigned kind of male or female at birth, and that sets us up often on a pathway in which our physical experiences actually are very much set. So if we're on this binary pathway, little boys and little girls are treated very differently. Little boys are allowed to be physically active and play outdoors and rough and tumble play, whereas little girls have very different experiences. And that sets us up a very strict pathway throughout our lives. And so this is why we are in agreement with Simone de Beauvoir that this is created. Womanhood is this idea that we have now of male and female is kind of created in this way and gives us different experiences of the world.
That's beautiful. And we happily will celebrate biological advantages when we spot them in cis athletes like Simone Biles, who is like amazing and understandably top of her field. But also I remember people talking about the way in which her height affects things.
With the height advantage, mentions of perceived height advantage, transphobic rhetoric in sport often points to things like the after effects of puberty, like having broader shoulders, being taller, as we said, providing insurmountable advantage. Could you walk us why that may be untrue?
Yeah, so as you said, I think that's a really important point, that sport in and of itself does celebrate different kinds of advantages. And it's really very interesting to me which advantages as a society we have decided are quote unquote fair and which are quote unquote unfair. And that seems to now map on to whether or not you're trans or cis, which, obviously is hugely problematic. And so, yes, all of our bodies develop in different ways. We have different heights, we have different muscle sizes, maybe even different lung sizes or arm spans and so on. And usually that is celebrated in sport. Sport is about people doing extraordinary things. And so we find it very interesting when there is this ideological idea now about who is allowed to have a kind of advantage and where that advantage is perhaps exaggerated unnecessarily or unfairly. So we often hear about testosterone, particularly as some sort of advantage, even though that is not necessarily the case, that every athlete who wins an Olympic medal has higher testosterone. That is not something that is born out. And so, yes, our bodies are different. But as we said before, sport also, probably the biggest advantages are the social advantages. So we never talk about how finances or access to sport or the best training, the best medical support, the best nutrition are probably the things that cause the most and the biggest advantage in sport. But because it is sport and because it's such a physical activity, it's easy to look at someone and say, oh, they have broad shoulders, so that must be why they're winning. And that ignores all of the other social benefits and social factors that are at play in sports. So we really want to make sure that we're expanding this conversation beyond the so-called biological to recognize all these other things. We also might have an athlete who has the broadest shoulders, which might be really good for one particular sport, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will win all of the medals, especially if they haven't had access to training. I mean, how many Simone Bileses might there be in areas of the world where people don't have access to gymnastics, for example?
Yeah, and a couple of aspects in your question I think worth teasing out. So one thing is, I think how very sport specific these supposed advantages are. So I could see height being an advantage in basketball, for instance, but almost every other sport is not an advantage. There's some sports where it's actually could be a disadvantage. And that's borne out. If you look at the greatest athletes in certain sports, it's not just like the biggest, most powerful. Take football, for example. Some people think Diego Maradona was the greatest footballer. He was only 5'4" or something.
Oh, that's shorter than me.
That's my height.
Yeah. So that because actually that's a sport where being short, a lower center of gravity, makes it easier to push opponents away. But then another aspect of your question, this sort of excessive natural advantage, it's never questioned when it's cis men. So if you take Michael Phelps, the swimmer, he was, well, I don't want to disrespect him in any way, but he had certain physical features that seemed so suited for swimming, and we don't worry if men have naturally high testosterone levels. There's never any concern there. Whereas in women's sports, there's all this suspicion about it. People being made to take medication to lower testosterone levels. And this, I think, is one of the reasons it creates complications in regard to trans inclusion, because something that's not seen as problematic for cis men suddenly becomes problematic when it's a trans woman, or just any women's sport. Naturally, women who are naturally gifted, whether they be cis women or trans women, it's seen as suspicious. It raises questions of their femininity. Again, Beauvoir, who I mentioned, she talks about this, how some people who are classed as female also get told that they're not really women because they don't meet the gender norms that are required to be a real woman, because they're too masculine presenting, or even Beauvoir was used to all the misogyny in the world. She experienced it. So even if you just don't behave as women are expected to behave, and this is why women who play sport have always been suspicious. It's always been a subversive act for any women to be involved in sport and to be good at sport.
I think one of the key things that's on my mind after that wonderful breakdown is, why then are we segregating by gender and not attributes like weight classes or height?
Oh, such an excellent question. I think we have two parts to that answer. The first part is the historical, the history of women's sports. So we write in our book, Open Play, about the development of women's sport from the early 1900s, where when sport first started, there weren't actually specific rules that banned women from participating in what was just called sport. And so some women started entering into sport and into competitions. And we see over the history and over all sorts of different kinds of sports that when women started entering and when they started beating men, or potentially going to be beating men, that suddenly women were banned from sport, and that's when we see the creation of a women's category after that. So first of all, our first part of that answer is to say that we think, and I'll put this quite bluntly, that, patriarchy is scared of women who are too good at sport, and when it looks like women are going to be outclassing men at physical feats, they are kind of put into a different category, given different rules, potentially given smaller pitches to play on, or different kinds. We see in tennis less sets to play and so on. And so it does create this divide where we can't actually compare men and women's sports, so that masculinity can be protected in that way. So I think that's kind of the first half of the answer, is we have to look back to the history of the development of women's sport.
Just to add on the first part, I think when women were first included, and it was seen as a threat to masculinity, we saw a number of strategies. So one was just derision. So they would laugh at women who tried to play sports. But then derision doesn't always work, because it comes a point where you realise that, oh, they're quite good at this. And so there was a misogyny, backlash, violence against women. So there was a women's football match in late Victorian era where the women were actually chased off the pitch by a group of men, like wielding clubs and so on.
Oh, God.
Another response, women were forced to play football to begin with, again in the Victorian period, wearing dresses, which had lots of layers and very cumbersome. And there was actually a society formed for women to wear the same sporting equipment as men, just to wear boots and shorts and things, which at the time women weren't allowed to dress that way. But then the second part of the question, so you're saying, well, is it sustainable? Yeah, I think that is a very good question, because so the sort of people we argue against go on about testosterone level as if this is the chief determinant of sporting success, or as Sheree likes to call it,
the fountainhead of masculinity. We see society sees testosterone as this be-all, end-all molecule that really displays to us what masculinity is. We see this in movies. We see this, talk about these kinds of hormones. If you have high testosterone, somehow you're more of a man. And if you're a woman who has high testosterone, then you're too manly. You're not a woman.
People dosing up on it to try and make themselves more of a man. If that is a chief determinant of sporting success, then if you're talking about fairness, you could think, well, are there different ways in which sports should be organised? So there could be some situations where it makes sense to divide people up. If you take martial arts, you see, where there's potentially dangers in that. So people get divided like different coloured belts that indicates they're of a similar skill level. So you don't get somebody getting killed accidentally,
Skill-based matchmaking before skill-based matchmaking was in video games.
Skill. So have it skill-based, and there's a notion of biobanding, which suggests, like, say, if it's a sport, again, weight categories in boxing or wrestling, where it is relevant. Now that's suggesting a different framework, because a crude division by gender, the way we like to think of it, gender is only a proxy for some of these physical factors that can give an advantage. It's a very crude proxy, because you could say things like, well, on average, men are taller than women, but it's only on average, and we're only talking a few inches. So there's plenty of women who are taller than me. So if you think these certain physical features are giving advantages and it's threatening fairness, then divide by those features instead of this crude proxy for them.
Yeah, and so I work in injury prevention, and what I find really interesting, so I know a lot of people worry about injury, particularly in contact sports. And really, what's really interesting to me is in injury prevention, our first kind of point of call when we're thinking about making a sport safer is never to ban a group of people from playing that sport. We look at all sorts of other kind of interventions that can work. So Stephen mentioned biobanding. We see this in youth rugby, for example, where instead of classing teenagers by their age, they're actually classed by their maturation level, and so that they fit into a similar group. And I think these are much more interesting ways of classing sport that we can look at and think through, rather than, as Stephen said, this crude approximation by gender that is meant to kind of put us into categories of similar kinds of people. I think there are such interesting ways that we can think about this. It would mean changing sport, changing the way that we organise sport, the way that we administrate sport. But I think that is a way to make sport safer and more inclusive for everybody, and a better place for everybody, rather than going by just male or female.
Okay, then let's go the radical feminist take on this then. let's go for something a bit speculative and a bit daring. The fact that sport isn't divided up in those sorts of ways, when there's good reasons for it, makes you wonder, well, what's the real reason? It's divided up by gender. And here's one speculative claim. The whole point of sport is to show the physical superiority of men. It's designed exactly to do that. And it becomes then a central pillar of supporting the patriarchy.
To show and create the superiority of men.
Yeah.
So we see sports where women tend to do better than men, sports such as gymnastics or ultra endurance events, they don't get as high a prestige. What gets all the attention is sports where men feel that demonstrates their physical superiority. Because physical superiority is like one of the foundation stones of patriarchy. Men are in charge because they are superior in every way. That's the idea. And then, so sports get developed and they get the attention insofar as they can show that physical superiority. So what we've seen, sports where women succeed, there is a sort of patriarchal backlash. So an example we like to cite is in the 1992 Olympics. The skeet shooting event wasn't divided by gender. And why should it be divided? It's shooting. And a woman won it. Zhang Shang won it for China. She won the gold medal. So she's beaten all the men. And what a wound to the pride of the men competitors and all men spectators and men around the world.
Especially in shooting, which seems like such a masculine activity.
Would almost Texans think that the best shooter in the world is a woman. So there had to be a patriarchal response. And the next Olympics after that, women weren't allowed to compete in skeet shooting. And then the Olympics after that one, they were allowed to compete, but it was in a separate women's category, so they couldn't take the medal up from the man.
Rules so that it couldn't be compared to the men.
I think initially it had fewer targets so that they couldn't outscore the man. So I think that's very revealing to see the responses of the institutions to those cases of women succeeding in sport.
It seems ultimately that a lot of these moves are made out of protecting men's egos and patriarchal legitimacy, as opposed to anything about women's integrity or safety.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
That's the hypothesis we're working on, because it explains a lot of what's going on, I think.
Yeah, and something I'd like to add here is, of course, this is harmful to men as well. Patriarchy is harmful to everybody, right? So, it's exactly as you say, it's to uphold that kind of ego. It's to uphold this idea that men are better and bigger and stronger, but that's harmful to men as well. Patriarchy puts men into cages as well. Men are meant to be big and strong and powerful and are not allowed to be gentle and soft and sweet and not sporty, right? And I do think that that's what trans men are showing us as well, is a different kind of masculinity. And although we don't talk about trans men in sport very often, it's also because they don't uphold patriarchy in that way. Right? So it's harmful to everybody. And this is why we think, we do need to, sport is really important in understanding patriarchy, masculinity, femininity, and so on, and why we can think about doing things differently that makes it a safer space for everybody.
It's very nice to just hear it said so clearly and plainly when we are so often hearing such muddled confusion and misinformation regarding sports science, and the why we do the things that we do in sports. Let's get to the heart of the transphobia in sports, right? Let's get to the heart of transphobia in sports. What are, if any, the advantages of testosterone?
Oh, this is such an excellent question. And so, as we said before, testosterone is such an interesting hormone molecule because it has such a big part, it plays such a big role in our societal imagination, right? So every kind of movie out there always talks about testosterone as what it does and all these kind of magical properties almost that testosterone seems to have, especially when it comes to physical performances and advantages. Now, this is not borne out in the literature, all right? So there is this excellent book by Rebecca Jordan-Young and Katrina Karkazis called Testosterone and Unauthorized Biography.
Good book.
And
yes,
they work through this idea of testosterone, going through all the kinds of supposed advantages that it creates, and they debunk each of those as kind of societal myths and stories that we tell ourselves about testosterone. So yes, testosterone has very important functions in our bodies. Endogenous testosterone, so that testosterone that we naturally create, has very important functions in our bodies, and everybody has testosterone. It's not just men, cis men, that have testosterone. Everybody has testosterone, and we have varying fluctuations of testosterone in our bodies that fluctuates on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis, a year-to-year basis. And we think that, well, not just we think, research and science has shown that we can give testosterone either this outsized importance in sporting performance, or we can put it in its place and understand it as just one small part of what makes us as human beings. And so, the research and the science does not bear out the fact that testosterone supposedly has a massive performance advantage. And this is why we see that so many of the policies recently have moved away from testosterone testing and now towards genetic testing. So a few years ago, the policies were all about the levels of testosterone that you were or weren't allowed to have in your body. But that didn't bear out in the research as having any sort of linear effect. So, having some amount of testosterone did not mean that you were necessarily going to win races. And so that's why they've moved away from testosterone and towards other forms of control of women.
I think there's only one scientific question that should really matter in this debate, but it's a very simple one. But it is one that it can be determined empirically. And that question is whether trans women in particular, because that seems to be the one that causes the controversy, are trans women dominating the sports in which they participate? And the clear answer to that is no. So what I think has happened here in this discussion, like a magician, a conjurer often works by getting you to look somewhere else. So they don't want you to see the trick, so they divert your attention on something different. So we've got this clear empirical fact that trans women are not ruining women's sport. They're not cleaning up on all the medals. They're not qualifying for the Olympics in conspicuous numbers. So instead, the literature has tried to make us look, okay, so trans women don't have this obvious advantage, but start looking at breaking them down into body parts. So when we've looked at the literature in sport, it's all about things like muscle mass, saying, oh, well, these trans athletes have got greater muscle mass, greater bone density, higher testosterone levels, and this gives them an advantage. Well, some of the literature, I mean, if the advantage that trans athletes are supposed to have, which this literature suggests is something like 10 to 40% advantage of trans women over cis women, it would suggest that trans athletes are going to win all the competitions easily and be breaking all the women's world records. So I think that's part of the trick, to say that these body parts, and usually they're just measuring body parts of cis men and trying to equate that with trans women. I think the most obvious explanation is that trans women are not the same as cis men. They've had very different life experiences completely. So I think there's some kind of illusion that's being created there, this illusion that now everybody accepts that trans women have got this massive advantage, but it is purely an illusion not borne out by the results.
And I'll just add one more illusion here, or another trick that's used is the trick of double standards, right? So suddenly there is this testosterone level that you're allowed to have if you are competing in women's sports, because supposedly there is a gap between men and women in testosterone. But something that we've long wondered is in men's sports, what is the gap between the men who have the highest level of testosterone and the men who have the lowest level of testosterone? And why is that not regulated? Why isn't there like a, you are only allowed to have 10% more testosterone than your competitors if you're a man in men's sports?
Let me try and answer that, because I suspect, and first of all, I think they've probably never tested that, and why wouldn't they if they think testosterone's... But I think if they did test it, they'd find that it wouldn't correlate with sporting success. It's not simply that the men with the highest testosterone levels win everything.
Exactly.
So it would, perhaps the reason they're not conducting that research is that it would explode their own myth, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
The way that you two both talk about this and talk about the illusion and the focus on body parts and this really almost forensic examination, like very particular examination of the human body, it makes me think and feel like, is sports science the new modern phrenology, or like for trans people? That's what it makes me think of.
Oh my goodness. Wow. We need to use that phrase. We will attribute that to you. That is excellent.
Thank you.
Yes. And as someone who is trained in sports science, I'm really worried about that. And I think you're absolutely right about that being the new modern phrenology. I mean, something that I'm really concerned about is there is a lot of talk recently about how women's brains are somehow, again, smaller and more fragile and more prone to injury than men's brains. We're seeing a lot of this re-emergence of stuff that feminists and feminist scientists and a lot of people have done work of debunking over the years. And now we're seeing the rise of that. And as you say, sports science is becoming a really problematic science that is starting to uphold these old debunked ideas again in the service of patriarchy. So actually, I mean, I think that sounds really radical, but I think you're right. Sports science is the new modern phrenology, and it is doing exactly those harmful things that phrenology did in the past.
Well, and let's get to the biggest illusion of all then in this, which, if you're analysing what's going on, we've been sold this idea that this question, trans inclusion, is a scientific question. So it's a question that is answered through science. And I think that's completely wrong. This is fundamentally, and always has been, an ethical question, because it's about inclusion. And science can never tell us what we should do. That's always an ethical choice that's been made. Now, if we living in a society where an overarching value is patriarchy, and I think most societies that we know are patriarchal, and if we're living in an era where there's a dominating value of transphobia, which I think even in just like the last 5 years, we've seen a massive rise in transphobia, that's explaining what's really going on. There was a time 10 years ago, we look back at this as a wonderful time now, where trans athletes were being included. It wasn't raising issues. But we know that, so Judith Butler in a recent book about gender talks about like this rise in this international network funding transphobia. And I think when you look at sports organizations changing rules recently, now I'm not saying that they're directly implicated in any of that because I don't want them to sue me, but I can see how when they themselves can sense this dominating emergence of transphobia, they're kind of responding to what they might see as public opinion. And so when you look at, for instance, the recent IOC statement banning trans athletes, you can see this isn't really about the science. And I know there are people trying to sort of debunk the claims they make scientifically. There's part of me thinks that there's not even a point playing that game, because I also feel that there are some people in the organisation who know perfectly well that trans athletes don't have a biological advantage. It's not about persuading them of the science. It's more about persuading them to make an ethical choice that inclusion is the ultimate fairness. So if you talk about discussions of fairness and you're talking about who's got this advantage, that advantage, that also it's getting us to think about the wrong thing. I think the ultimate fairness is making sure everybody's included. Everybody gets a chance to participate. So this is like a fundamental of our sort of feminist approach, that this is an ethical question, not a scientific one.
Exactly, and when we've done all this debunking, it's sort of left them with no sort of grounds to stand on, if even their scientific foundation is flawed, and it's now a case of them being ethically just completely out of touch.
We could talk for a second about the data, I guess, used in anti-trans studies. If we're aware that this is fundamentally an ethical question, and it's trying to be tested out and sort of solidified through this kind of this science, and I'll use air quotes, listeners. What do you think about the data that you've seen in anti-trans sports science? What's your experience been of its reliability or its scientific worth?
So 2 things for me to say on that. The first thing is to continue this conversation that we're having, science and this science can always be used to further any sort of agenda. So we've seen that we've seen race science being used to further racist kind of agendas. We're seeing this kind of science to further transphobic and these kinds of agendas as well. So science is not I think this is a really important point for me. Science is not a neutral thing that can answer all of our questions. Science is done by human beings, and human beings, we have our own biases, we have our own points of view, we have our own ideologies, and we think that that's really important to put forward. This is why we wear on our sleeves that we are feminist researchers, because we think it's important to put that on the table, and then people can make up their own minds about where we sit with our work and the conclusions that we come to. So being open and honest about that is really important. And we've seen in the history, and this is why ethical standards exist now, because we've seen science being used to uphold really, really harmful anti-human rights agendas in the past. So, just because there is science or people are scientists does not mean that they are necessarily good people who are doing good work. So just to put that on the table, it's true.
Yeah.
And then the second part of, the crux of your question really is the research that we've looked at. So we've recently completed a really big project where we've gone back and read all and analyzed all of the scientific papers that are used to uphold these policies. So that work is in progress, and we're hoping to get that published. But just to share with you a kind of flavor of that, what we found is that all of the scientific work that's often used to uphold these ideas about trans advantage in sports, number one, almost none of those studies actually study sporting populations. Number two, the vast majority of these studies are really quite old in scientific terms. They're 10, 20, 30 years old, which is very out of date, not only in terms of trans healthcare, but also the way that we might do scientific studies. And number three, they study, as we were saying earlier, very small body parts, and then, that is being used to kind of extrapolate into bigger questions. So we've seen studies that might look at, a thigh muscle, for example, and that's being used to uphold ideas about sporting advantage, even though this study was only about trans healthcare in the early 2000s. So the science doesn't really hold up. People are making big claims and big jumps from science that is not relevant, actually, to the sporting question. And then I think the biggest part of this is it's being hidden behind, again, as Stephen was saying earlier about illusions. We're often told, or the picture is put out there, that this is a very complex issue, and normal people couldn't possibly understand this because testosterone and molecules and all these scientific equations and big scientific words, because it's so complicated. Advantage is such a complicated, complex question that it makes people feel like they don't have enough knowledge to have an informed opinion on this. And so what we try and do in our work is, again, show these illusions for what they are. And we want to say really clearly, this is not complex and it's not difficult. Those things are being used to, in this kind of magic trick, to give us the illusion that it's really complex, when really the question is really fair. I mean, really simple and easy. You know, who do we want sport to be for, and what do we want it to look like?
Yeah, I mean, just something I want to add to that. It's also clear when we've looked at the literature that the threshold is not met for public policy change. So usually any policy in, say, public health, such as one regarding sport, but any policy, you usually need a large number of trials. So randomized controlled trials are regarded as the gold standard. Now, usually there has to be a high number and then a systematic review. But what we've seen, there's so few serious studies. We're certainly talking about those involving trans athletes. We're talking about like single figures of studies. And even if you take an extended literature, this stuff we've read that looks at body parts, again, we're talking about 13, 14, 20 studies. This does not meet the threshold for any public policy change. And the IOC should know this, for instance, which I think they do know it. So when you're talking about the science, I think if you were to summarize the science and you were to take seriously or regard this as a scientific question, it's clear the conclusion you should draw is that there is currently insufficient research to draw any firm conclusions in this space. So any paper published really should be saying more work is needed on this.
Yeah, exactly. Often the point of it, it's complicated, it just reminds me so much of whenever we're talking about the puberty blocker bans and saying, it's so complicated. So, there's too many things we don't know enough, or we do know enough, and there's these paradoxes of knowing. And it's always the fights between trans sports and other aspects of trans activism is so heavily interconnected as well. What are your thoughts on that one?
Oh, I agree completely. It's, as you say, it's these double standards that makes me think of, again, with puberty blockers, there's this double standard of when it's cis kids receiving puberty blockers, that is understood as safe, and we've used that for many years, and there have never been any large issues with that. But now suddenly these big concerns, quote unquote, are raised because it's trans kids receiving healthcare, and these should be healthcare issues that are made between people and their doctors. It's so I completely agree with you. It's this illusion that's created that this is extremely complex and we don't know all the side effects yet, and we don't know the long-term outcomes, but we do, and there has been a lot of work on that. And so you're absolutely right. And the same thing is done in each of the different fights across this space. Yeah. So this is why we think it's really important to understand this in an intersectional way.
It's striking how easy it is to get HRT if you're cis, but if you're trans, it's suddenly all these questions asked. Gender affirming care is fine as long as you're affirming the gender that you were assigned originally.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which at that point means it's not fully affirming, is it? It's more compounding. It's compounding on whatever you already have.
Yeah. Exactly.
True affirmation means true choice.
Exactly.
But you mentioned feminism there, and being feminist in your framework. Obviously, I know that most of our listeners are likely going to be familiar with feminism. If you're not, then amazing, you've got this deep into it. But what is the central difference in feminist sports theory in contrast to how we normally think of sports?
Do you want to take that?
Oh, I'll take it, yeah. Well, first of all, I think one reason we got interested in feminism in this space is because, and I'm sure you've been aware of this, that in recent years, there has been a rise in people claiming that they're taking a feminist approach, but which was anti-trans. So, we've all heard this expression, TERF, trans excluding radical feminists. So we were interested in kind of what would be a more authentic feminist reading and a more authentic feminist approach to this issue. So that's why, for instance, we're very serious about reading the feminist literature, which I suspect people on the other side have not done, because had they done so, I don't see how they could possibly hold the views that they hold. So if you look at some of the great feminists like Mary Wollstonecraft, we love Mary Wollstonecraft. So she's writing in 18th century, but even then she's all over it. You can tell what her response would be to the issue of trans inclusion. In fact, she even cites in a footnote Madame d'Eon and says she was an exemplary woman. Madame d'Eon was a trans woman, and she knew she was a trans woman. So we're interested in how a feminist should approach the issue of sport generally. And we're mainly just interested in feminist theory applied to sport, and the work we do on sort of trans inclusion. It's not our main issue. And I think in a way, if the world was right, this wouldn't be the issue that it is. It's not
a good issue. We're only using that one.
Would that it were, yeah.
It's been made an issue, and I think there's a bigger feminist question about, how any woman playing sport challenges patriarchy. So one key thing we're interested in is how sport would look if it was organised on feminist principles instead of how it's currently organised on patriarchal principles. And so we question things like why it's so gender divided. I mean, an obvious thing there, it's wedded to a gender binary, and it's struggled to find a place for anybody who doesn't fit the binary. It's kind of denying the reality of non-binary existence. So we're interested in imagining a feminist future for sport and how different it would look from sport as currently arranged.
Yeah, and so in our book, we really expose, I guess, this difference between sport and women's sport. So men's sport is often just called sport. We don't often say men's sport. And women's sport, which is the lesser kind of form of the sport. And we said these are, the forms of sport that have developed over time according to this binary and with all the proxies we spoke about earlier. And so we're interested in reimagining what the future of sport might look like if it's not kind of segregated into male and female, and what might the future of sport look like? And that's what we call feminist sport. So we're thinking about sport organized according to our values. So what might feminist values be? We might be looking at equity and equality. We might be looking at participation rather than winning. We might be looking at sport without capitalism and all of the problems that come with that. And sport that creates a safe space for everybody. And so this is what we call feminist sport. And so we're interested in, back to your earlier question, in organizing sport differently. How might we organize sport if it wasn't, this kind of sport that already exists, that the IOC administers, and that is all about money and about male and female and about winning and about, then the doping and the cheating and all of that comes into play. And sport doesn't need to be that. I mean, what we're really interested in is models of sport that have changed things. So we love roller derby, for example, because roller derby, massively inclusive sport that shows us that all of these supposed problems do not exist. Roller derby is a massively physical contact sport, and all of the supposed problems about injury and so on, a fragile woman, really doesn't exist in that space. But we also love things like
Gals FC.
Gals FC. I don't know if you've heard of Gals FC.
Yes,
but basically, they're a non-competitive sports league for all women. They're very inclusive, and they don't have referees and winning, but it really is a space for participation.
And what do they have instead of referees?
They have vibe protectors instead of referees.
Protecting the vibes.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's all about the good vibes.
If you're playing in too patriarchal way, they will come and protect the vibe.
And so I think there's no coincidence that Parkrun is now catching, problems. We know that there is people are wanting to, well, transphobes are really wanting to or are not happy with Parkrun because Parkrun is maximally inclusive and does not segregate. They want that to be more segregated.
It's very grassroots, isn't it? It's very bottom up. The sports that we think exhibit feminist values best tend to be grassroots, bottom up. Whereas if you look at the opposite, patriarchal values, what does patriarchy value? It values things like hierarchy and authority and power and wealth. And so these grassroots sports like roller derby and parkrun, they don't want to be part of this hierarchical structure. They don't want to submit to some governing body, for instance. And you've had this in recent years in sports. Parkour is another example where it was kind of a countercultural grassroots thing. And there was debate in the parkour community as to whether they wanted to become like an Olympic sport, whether they wanted to be, because they knew the price to pay for that is that you have to come under this hierarchical, patriarchal structure. So that's why I think that the feminist sports are going to be more community-based. They're going to be self-organising grassroots sports. That's what we'd see as a feminist future for sport.
On the point about the ADF attacks on Parkrun and everything, it's always trying to reinforce like judgments like the Supreme Court ruling onto Parkrun when they really don't want to. And it really also reinforces how much that's connected to how much the fight for transport and, for example, the fight for the Supreme Court are so extremely linked. And we've seen a lot in a poll we did with our community earlier, for example, that they've put transports at the bottom of their priorities list for transports. But given how easily connected and how much the arguments for transports undermines the arguments for the Supreme Court in its own right because it's so bioessentialist and all that crap, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Alex. I think this is why the other side have actually, I think they have strategically picked on and chosen sport as a space through which they can bring in all of those kind of changes that they want. They understand the power of sport in our kind of cultural imagination in the world and as a space that can be a testing ground for bringing in even more extreme measures down the line. As you say, if they can implement that within Parkrun, then they can do it, across other areas of society. So we come up against this problem as well, getting funding to do our research. Because, as you say, sport is often put at the bottom of that pile when we have so many other problems that seem really, really important to deal with, right? Sport seems like, oh, that's just a nice to have, that's an optional extra. People opt into sport. But we're really trying to show people how sport is the space that we really have to look at because they are strategically using sport.
It's become a key battleground.
That's it.
Apologies for the military metaphor, but I think it has become this key contested space where people pushing a certain agenda saw it as an easy way in, but it's also clear that it's become a gateway to so much more. So some people who began by saying, oh, they just wanted to protect women's sport, we see how quickly that progresses on to a whole bunch of other ideas. So I think it's been a very deliberate tactic to use sport as a gateway to something far less pleasant, but which we have seen on the rise all around the world. Yeah, with sports researchers, partly because we see the sort of cultural significance of it and how it's been able to change that conversation for the worse.
From where you are, looking out at the landscape that is sports, where do you see trans inclusion in sports going in the future, with the IOC, Supreme Court, like the lay of the land? How do you think things are panning out, at least in the immediate?
Yeah.
Well, I think, and I've thought this for a while, I think things will get worse before they get better. I think it's not until we see the fall of the far right all around the world that this will get better, because I think there's a bigger picture here. But I don't want that to sound too pessimistic, because I think we're starting to see the end of the beginning of this with Orban losing in Hungary and the Trump regime being in such trouble. And I'm absolutely convinced that the only future for the whole world is a feminist future. The reason I say that is because the alternative, unfettered patriarchy and capitalism, will produce the end of the world. I said this was optimistic. But
optimistic in Durham terms.
But yeah, the only future will have to be a feminist future. If there are human beings here in 100 years, the society will be run on feminist principles. And a part of that, may seem a small part of that, I do think sport will be entirely trans-inclusive. It would have to be.
Yeah. So you can tell Stephen's the philosopher. He thinks in like hundreds of years, thousands of years. I'll bring us more to the short kind of medium term. I agree that it probably is going to get worse before it gets better, and that's a terrifying fact. I will say there are amazing people doing incredible work on this and who are fighting this amazing fight, who we are supporting in many ways. But I will also say, I think we shouldn't despair by the fact that the IOC and, these big sports organizations are becoming more exclusive and more transphobic, because they are actually becoming less relevant in the world. And I think this is part of their kind of fight to try and stay relevant. But I do think things like the we've seen the Commonwealth Games basically disappear. We see the Olympic Games, the FIFA World Cup coming up, the Men's World Cup, is losing relevance in this world. And I think what people are wanting more and more is grassroots, community, smaller level things that we are much more interested in our own communities, our own spaces. And I think that's growing and taking over actually that market share that the IOC and FIFA and so on used to have. And I think that's where the hope is for me, because when we look at community sports, the ones we've already mentioned, but also just our communities and people around us, I think we've seen this in the world of social media as well, right? Social media, I think a lot of people are kind of turning away from social media because we've seen what Elon Musk has done to Twitter and so on. And actually going back to, I think there's a hankering for more in-person things, smaller, lower level things. And I think the IOC and so on are very scared of that.
You're so right. I mean, I think sports that become rigidly trans excluding will decline in popularity. I mean, I've got faith in young people who are seeing through a lot of this, and also young people whose attitude to gender is so much different from previous generations. So you're not going to be able to stop this development. And if you look at, say, a football club like Arsenal Women, which we both like, it is so inclusive. It's so LGBTQ inclusive. And that explains a lot of their success. So I agree with your form of optimism, Sheree, that the sports should realise that if they want a future, their way forward is to be as inclusive as possible. And those that sort of bow to this kind of dominant culture of transphobia, I think will become less and less relevant. They're appealing to kind of aged population that's dying out. Young people want inclusion.
Well, I think it's no coincidence that it is those sports that are kind of dying out. I have to say, swimming, rugby, and so on, that are the most transphobic sports, actually are the sports that are really losing out on that kind of market share, which is what they really care about. Whereas a sport like football, I think it's no coincidence that FIFA has been a little bit quiet on this front. They're not great, they're not perfect, but they're not as bad as the IFC.
Yeah, that's
they realize they can't be. They want to grab the people over from rugby and over from swimming and so on.
Yes, you're right.
So for our audience, where can we find your work, and how can our audience help support the work you're doing?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we handily have a great website. It's www.feministsportlab.com. So if you have a look on the website, we have all of we have our members on there, we have the work that we're doing on there, and we have a contact form if anybody would like to contact us. We're also over on Instagram and on TikTok. I cannot remember what those handles are, but people can find us just by searching Feminist Sport Lab on those platforms.
We'll put them in.
Thank
you.
Put
them in.
So, good interview, excellent work. Very much enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I am definitely a person who voted in the poll and said sports I am not a participant nor a particular enjoyer of sport. However, listening to that interview and the way they framed a lot of the images actually made me reconsider how I feel about that. And particularly with the thing that we've already mentioned in terms of the ADF pushing at an open door, they think that this is a space where they can gain some ground. So that's a problem. So just a couple of quick notes of the interview, because I was literally going through the interview while writing and then pausing the interview to make notes about it and then going back to writing. So it turns out I can still multitask, which I was delighted to discover. So I always appreciate a Simone de Beauvoir reference.
Right.
So she's the one who coined "one is not born but becomes a woman." That's more of a social construction thing rather than an explicitly transpositive thing, and unfortunately we can't ask her anymore. But nevertheless, that's kind of a phrase that I've always glommed onto, let's say.
Glom.
Yeah, I've heard people say glom onto it, and I've kind of just started using it, even though it sounds kind of gross.
No, I dig it. It's very Futurama.
I've got some glom on me. I just need to wipe it off.
That's giving something about Mary.
New modern phrenology, love it. Great phrasing. Obviously, we'll come back to that in a moment. Social construction of gender is much more of a factor than any biological imperatives. So Michael Phelps and his lack of lactic acid that lets him swim quicker is cool, but Caster Semenya and her slightly higher than usual testosterone isn't cool.
Isn't this interesting?
And as we've already kind of hinted at, using sport as a testing ground for implementing regressive policy, and the unfortunate likely truth that things are going to get worse before they get better. Sterling work, both of you, genuinely, really nicely done. The pair of them, Sheree and Stephen, could have listened to them all day. Genuinely,
Truly.
really, really good.
Truly.
Yeah, right.
This is why I love and adore social sciences so much, because as much as the origins of most of these areas of study, not starting out from the kindest of places, they often they can be used for so much good. And there's so much of learning about social sciences has been a radicalization process for me in some ways, radicalization towards empathy, towards, the ways in which we kind of piece apart, we sort of like reverse engineer what the D&D rules are that we're playing with. And when I see people kind of constructing that player's handbook, it makes me so alive, because it feels like there is people that are trying to piece apart these experiences that we keep having to just kind of go through and then be like, oh, that was weird, or I think this works like this and whatnot. And yeah, when there's people who are taking all of this work, and then they are also doing that like important meta-analysis. They're building up for that kind of like, what can we create towards? What do we want sport to look like? What do we want sport to look like? And like asking that question out and building towards that, as opposed to just critique. And I say this as someone who loves critique, you know what I mean? But like, it's good. It's good.
Critiques are our stock in trade. Sorry, on you go, Alex.
Yeah, I think immediately when I spoke to them back in 2023 to try and get a sports special going, I knew that they were the ones who I had to get on for this kind of thing. I mean, because as you mentioned, it changed my thoughts of, instead of just talking about debunking the ideas of sports bans or just stopping at just being like, oh, let's stop the bans on trans people participating. What we need to think further than that and change the very foundations of how sports is organized as a whole, which was such an intriguing concept, and they've argued it so well and is really important for what we need to think about. And I've also been reading through their books as well, and and when they explain the science, when I was trying to decide my thoughts on transports itself, it was looking at the science in the hard science way, but they helped shift the thinking while also telling me that the science is on our side, which a lot of the community really think, oh no, the science, and it's saying that trans people have this advantage, which we've seen from Sheree and Stephen, that it is on our side, and we've got so much we can build on and go further than just overturning bans, stopping sex testing, and really moving forward with that.
And also just hearing the on its face argument of, if trans domination in sports was a thing, wouldn't more of us be winning? Like, show me the trans domination first, and then I'll see that it's a problem we need to handle. But I don't think it is, because it's not. And even if trans people were to be consistently good athletes, then all's fair in the world of sport, you know what I mean? Like, Michael Phelps has no lactic acid. Simone Biles has the aerodynamics of a squirrel. These are amazing things. They're wonderful things about the human body. It's beautiful that we're able to be so multivariate in the way that we like work and move in this world. And yeah, I think it's poor sportsmanship to be like to blame the workman's tools.
Oh, exactly.
Kind of mixing our metaphors here a little, but I think that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so do we want to get into a little bit more theory?
Let's do it.
Strap in, everyone.
Okay, theoretical.
We're strapping our shoes, not in a seat.
Because I'm aware that there's some things in the interview that we haven't fully explained, and there's some thoughts I've had afterwards that I really want to get into. So, we all know that the situation in sports is fucked. We knew that before this episode, you know, and we know that there are amazing people doing that good work, from being supportive for trans friends and turning up to have their voice heard in communities to doing the research. And I also understand that for so many of us, it does come secondary to things that we engage in more in everyday life. I completely understand that. By the way, we aren't telling anyone that their priorities are wrong. But after working on this episode and hearing Sheree and Stephen, I also agree with them and think that might be exactly what they're banking on us thinking and doing. And I don't want to leave us open for tackle. Hear me out for a second, because while we all focus on the things that we consider bigger issues, if we don't start to get much more serious about preventing sports being the practicing ground for our pathologization, then we may end up with even bigger consequences than being banned from participating. Because, as I mentioned in the interview, anti-trans assholes are trying to codify a new form of phrenology, which I will finally explain now for those who aren't aware. So, phrenology is essentially the half-forgotten father of eugenics that was created almost 100 years before eugenics was fully founded. It was specifically the idea that you could determine mental traits based upon the size and shape and the grooves and stuff of people's heads. And that someone's head would contour in relation to how their brain grows, which at the time, we're talking like 1700s, was thought to consist of various organs. It's pseudoscience, right? And developed over time to being used to justify the transatlantic slave trade, gender stereotyping, basically all of the worst hits. The reason this came to me in the interview, aside from the fact that I'm a social sciences and philosophy nerd at heart, is because this bizarre frottage of the head that high-ranking academics were all over in the 1700s was one of the cornerstones of the creation of criminology, which I've studied. Phrenology was often and frequently used to specifically decipher who was criminal. Lombroso, who is about as useful as Freud these days, was considered the grandfather of criminology in some ways, and he was also a fervent phrenologist and eugenicist. Obviously, anti-trans sports science at the moment is not focusing on head size, but various parts of the body instead, and undoubtedly has many more roots in eugenics. But the reason why I specifically bring phrenology into this discussion is because whereas eugenics focuses on features to argue someone is lesser in some way, phrenology focused first and foremost on how to signify who was a danger. And this notion of parts of your biology being inherently dangerous or unfair to be near others is exactly the kind of thing being argued by transphobes in sport. This is why the episode is called Frankenstein's Evidence, the Modern Phrenology. It looks genuinely Frankensteinian. The sifting and sorting through body parts in bizarre fixation and rank hope of proving the meat that you like most is safest for everyone. The piecemealing of human flesh into small digestible chunks as if they aren't connected to a whole being. It is the work of armchair butchers. And if this feels a bit dramatic, then let's take a deeper look at the recent stories we've mentioned. I already spoke about how darts and pools exclusion are connected, but it goes deeper than that. At Harriet Haynes' civil trial, a witness called Dr. Emma Hilton was called. And I'll let you know now, she wasn't fighting for trans inclusion in sports. She pops up again with the DRA, who not only referenced Haynes' case, but also commissioned a report from Dr. Hilton specifically. She was involved in these cases because she is a doctor who has published papers on sex and sport. She is also deeply involved in sex matters and is even listed as interim chair of the Board of Trustees. And while we do not have the bibliography for the IOC, I might be willing to bet the next imaginary round of drinks on whether her name may appear or not. Noah Lynn's competitors have for the most part been good to her and supportive, with big names like Fallon Sherrick even supporting her on team games alongside others. Even one of the biggest names in the sport, Michael van Gerwen, who has been world champion multiple times, came out in support of her. Even the other athletes don't want this. So why do the DRA? Well, Harriet Haynes' case is likely to be the first to seriously challenge the Supreme Court ruling with respect to sports and with respect to trans inclusion in social kind of spaces outside of the immediate things of changing rooms and whatnot. And I think we may be missing the mark for how important that is in terms of ratifying this dangerously harmful non-science into precedent and policy, because it will help the further enshrinement of this now phrenology-looking beast into our systems and institutions with all of its snarling, shiny teeth. And I promise I'm wrapping up soon, but let me just pull back to something that the experts mentioned in our interview. They were talking about how sports props up the mythology of patriarchy, right? As well as starting the interview talking about how the biggest advantage in sport is financial, not meritocratic, which just means those who do better are rewarded better. This bodged science is not being used for exploration, but justification of already existing prejudice with the aim of putting it into practice and policy. Picking sports bolsters so much more directly this myth of meritocratic patriarchal prowess because they're Mother Nature's little boys. And I believe that if we really work to tackle this with researchers like the Feminist Lab, Direct Action, Legal Action, if we were to secure the future that Sheree and Stephen dream of sports divisions that are based in skill and not sex, we would not only take out a big chunk of the naturalization of masculine supremacy, and we also cannot forget how this junk science is wrapped up in white supremacy too, and will have further detrimental effects on women of color, regardless of if they are cis or not, and that needs preventing just as much. We would also be able to better and more fully expose the true thing holding back fairness in sports: capitalism. Seriously, if you want fairness in sport, then you should start by making it as easily accessible for all, not less.
So, normally with, when we're doing a meat section, we kind of alternate every couple of paragraphs between the three of us. But Flint wrote this, and it was so bloody good. I was like, right, you are. Yeah.
This is all yours.
This is, absolutely all yours. Yeah, that comparison to phrenology is completely on point. And I think we cannot stop pointing out the kind of eugenical origins of all of this stuff. And like, I don't think it's just the origins, right? The ADF, when they're talking about Parkrun, and the organizations that are saying, no, we need more split different categories. Trans women can't compete. Women with testosterone over a certain amount can't compete, blah, blah, blah. That is automatically a eugenicist line of thinking. And it's the Judith Butler quote, right? Once you've decided that one vulnerable minority can be sacrificed, you then decide, well, there can be a second, a third, a fourth, and then where are we all? It's automatically operating within a fascist logic.
Yes.
Which is, so talking about sports and sports categorization, definitely not what Judith Butler meant by that, but I did feel it, I feel the comparison wasn't spurious.
It's a micro of that macro, because that was a macro statement, but in a micro, it makes sense how you can see that reflected in who is allowed to compete in sports or not, Because but before you get to the point where you decide that a group can be sacrificed, you get to the point where you decide that a group can be excluded.
And your point about the thing holding back fairness in sports is capitalism, but it's also patriarchy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's the two in tandem. They are so intertwined because, as our experts explained, the history of women's categories in sport is because men were concerned about being outplayed, literally.
Yes.
And, all of these things are coalescing together. The racism, the sexism, the transphobia, the ableism. We haven't spoken about ableism, but don't think I've not thought about it. And all of these things in sport directly is a very big space for this consistent reinforcing of this myth of patriarchy, this myth of stronger bodies, stronger minds, stronger will. And that means that it is fertile ground for us to tackle that shit if we put more time and effort into it, which I think would be cool and nice if people have time and effort and energy, because obviously there are so many battles to be fighting. And I don't think that anyone is less worthwhile than any other. I think that the most important thing is if you know that you care a lot about one thing and that's the thing that you want to do some activist work in, go and do it, because there will be other people that care about other things that can do those other things as well. You don't have to do every single element of it, but find an area of strength and then let other people do the things that they have in their strength, and talk to each other, But that's just me shooting the shit. The more that we tackle that reinforcement, I think that it does a lot.
Transport is a whole thing where there's not a lot of people in that sort of field of fighting, so you can easily carve out your own interesting space in that area of activism. But going back to the whole thing about misogyny, you can see that when things start off with the fight of misogyny in trans sport, it then always leaks down to, things like the Supreme Court ruling. It seems to always start at trans sport, so we need to make sure that the buck stops at trans sport, not just moving on from it to then fight in other arenas.
This shit poor science is done in the dark. It's allowed to circulate. It's allowed to propagate. It's allowed to become policy. And then we're fighting it on the back foot. We need to start tackling this more directly and at the science, because even if we were to undo those sports bans, if all of that science is still there in the background swirling around for anyone to use, then we aren't going to be doing we aren't going to be playing the long game. Sports.
Well, I mean, if it's the science as far as the IOC are concerned, the science is a complete mystery. Anyway, onward, I think.
I mean, it sounds like the IOC are losers, I would say, but that's not who we have here, is it? Who's in the corner?
Yeah, exactly. Off to Losers' Corner. And then... So, after a celebratory drink and a good coffee house-esque natter, as we walk home from the finish line, let's take a look at a DNF. Not that those who don't complete marathons lose, you're by far fitter than I will ever be, but this organisation definitely ran the gambit and now they're paying their price for it. Literally, yes, it's time for Losers' Corner. Today's loser is USA Powerlifting, which has been forced to pay a trans athlete an undisclosed sum and to eventually change some of its policies, at least in Minnesota. Powerlifter J.C. Cooper filed her initial discrimination claim all the way back in 2019, and alongside gender justice, she successfully argued her case before the Minnesota courts late last year. The unanimous ruling issued in October determined that in Minnesota, all public accommodations must obey the state's anti-discrimination law, and sports governing bodies fall under that, as does seemingly anything that operates in Minnesota, like refreshments facilities. So, to quote the judgment, it would be impermissible for USA Powerlifting to prohibit all transgender women from competing in the women's division based on a stereotype that all transgender women possess an unfair competitive advantage. Oof. Ultimately, this means that USA Powerlifting will have to amend its transphobic policy, although for now the sports body has just put a footnote at the bottom of its policy saying the USA Powerlifting transgender policy does not apply to Minnesota competitions. As this is a matter of state law, there's no higher court for this issue to go to, and although there's other details to explore in Minnesota law following the settlement, JC can now get a well-deserved rest. So congratulations for JC for getting that sporting win, getting that settlement payout from USA Powerlifting, and for shoring up the rights of all Minnesotans in the process. So why put this story here, and why put it after the meet? It's because we think this shows exactly the ethical and immediate human impact of these stories, because JC had to spend years of her life fighting, and there are so many athletes who don't get the opportunity due to how prohibitively expensive the court can be. Oh, whenever I have to read a loser's corner, I have to put the same energy as Flint does.
Yeah.
I bet the listeners thought that we were just forgetting about it, but we got it. But yeah,
we remember. There's
Yeah.
a couple of other things coming that you might have thought we've forgotten about, but no, we haven't. We're just doing it in a different order because we're cool and funky like that.
Yeah, we've been a bit anarchic, and we usually have the meet in a very specified order, but this time we're like, fuck the order.
Whatever's going to have the information make the most sense, have the best flow, be the most impactful, that's what I'm always for. But yeah, it is exactly about, like, you know, like, I have no idea how JC found like her representation or whatnot, but you know, it's often up to whether there is someone like Good Law Project who might take on something pro bono, or whether, you know, you're able to raise funds, and that's a lot. And so it's the fact for me, the thing with this story is the fact that this woman has had to fight so hard and so long in order to receive some kind of settlement. However, this has only really been able to secure safety for her state. Now, on the other hand, she's secured safety for her state. That's fucking phenomenal. That is amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the fact that you can work so hard for so long, and there's still always going to be more, because this is such a big thing. It's such a big thing.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of there's always going to be more, one thing that we are aware of but weren't able to put in the episode is that our friends at the Good Law Project are fighting a case in cricket, right? Where something similar is happening, where the transphobic rules of a cricket organisation are up for a challenge thanks to Good Law Project. So this stuff is happening in this country as well. It's not just Minnesota and Montana and all the places we talk about in pond hopping. It happens right here at home with our own flavours of sporting ban. So that's spiffing. However, absolutely congratulations to JC for winning the case for an undisclosed and hopefully massive sum.
$5 billion.
Probably not that much.
Damn, that would have been really good for our funds.
Wouldn't? Yeah, right?
If we randomly receive $5 billion, that would be great, but I don't know how we'd be able to receive that much amount of money without it meaning that it was stolen from someone else.
True. Transphobes?
We are not advocating that anyone tries to pickpocket or steal the credit cards of transphobes, no matter how annoying and repugnant they may be.
But if you do, our Swiss bank account that we definitely have. Obviously, Don't steal money from transphobes. Do it in a courtroom like the Good Law Project do.
Yeah, do it legally and correctly when they do some fucked up shit.
Precisely. Yeah. Something else that you, dear listener, may have thought that we've missed out is, of course, our favourite thoroughfare. It's Action Alley.
Yay!
Yeah. So now that we've gone through everything, here's what you can do about it. So let's go through Action Alley as we work our way back to the studio and check in on some trans joy. In Southampton and Nottingham, and in many other cities no doubt, there are protests to mark Idahobit, or International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia. We'll include links to...
Clickables.
Oh yes, of course. I keep.
You did it. You did it.
I make a rule for myself only, and then completely forget about it. So what's the point of even trying to do
free
it?
Comedy.
Yeah. So there will be something to click on for Idahobit, which is coming up. We'll, keep people posted on social media because there's undoubtedly going to be quite a few Idahobit gatherings, vigils, protests, and there should be, frankly.
It's Hobit, not Hobbit. That's what I saw in the Royal Albert Hall.
Idahobit, you
Right.
Hobit, we all the Hobit.
We all Idahobit. Very good.
And to keep up with our sporting theme, we've got a couple of things as well. So there's a letter writing campaign about fighting the ADF's campaign against Parkrun, which we mentioned earlier. So we're going to make a clickable down below. It sounds like an edible to translate down.
Yet again, adding to the law that Alex is the biggest stoner on the pod. I love this.
Yeah.
You're becoming like the dude in the Big Lebowski, but it's just...
I mean, I just like the fact that we spent half this episode in a pub.
Yeah. Too right in it. I'm just so glad that I'm back in a pub that actually serves snake bite and black. Fucking happy days.
Yeah. Classic stuff. Shh. I'm trying to record a podcast. So there's a letter-writing campaign to National Collegiate Rugby who, well, they very quietly banned trans athletes in the middle of the night on Trans Day of Visibility, right? So National Collegiate Rugby... yeah, definitely. I think it's probably...
Get in the bin.
Get in the bin and get the bin thrown into the sea.
Compost thoroughly.
Yes, environmentally
Definitely.
more friendly, depending what you're composting.
So, yeah, another letter writing campaign organised by Rugby for All. We will include details and a thing to click on.
And there is also a open letter to the Scottish FA for their ban on trans players also. So there is a link to that as well, because... sports are busy bees at the minute.
Mm-hmm. Something else I do just want to mention real quick, though, is that we're aware that the BMA, that challenge that the BMA made to the cast review, so we're aware that that has now come out, but we obviously have elected not to cover it in this episode because we... put enough work into making it a sports episode without distracting. We'll give you a full breakdown of it next time.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to say, we're aware of that. We know it's there, but stick with us and we'll tell you all about it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it literally became public, like, just as we had finished wrapping up on writing the script. So at that point...
yeah, a few hours ago.
You know, quite frankly, we'll get to it. We definitely will get to it. We'll get
to it. We will.
And speaking of things that we might get to, depending on how things go, just in case, the HRC guidance might come out between now and the next episode. So if anything comes up with that, just check out our Actions website where you can have where it's going to be regularly updated, and you can we'll link it down, we'll clickable it down below, and you can keep up with what to do. Yeah.
Yes. I think that we should link this all back to Trans Joy.
Very good, very good. So when trawling through the Trans Joy submissions this week, I put all of the sporting ones right at the front because that seemed appropriate.
Fair. I did say bonus points if it's sporty, so...
You did say that. So Lynn's 1888 says, I got signed up for a second women's football in Canada since being here. They asked me to play and waived the registration fee, which is over £100, just to get me to play whilst at uni here. Completely different to the UK.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, that's
amazing.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So T4T said, I did my first V3 in the bouldering gym, which is the arbitrary level I made myself get to before going to their queer club. So now I get to go to a queer bouldering club every other week and make more queer friends.
Yes. And Spooky Aaron says, I've started going to the gym, which is really helping with my bouldering.
Yeah.
As I've been able to do a wall difficulty I hadn't been able to manage before, as well as the muscle is giving me gender euphoria. Also, the bouldering gym I go to is inclusive. They hold queer meetups and have your pronouns and preferred title on the system. And I love how present bouldering is in these responses, because I have heard before that, you know, if you're trans, you're either going to get into bouldering or you're going to get into D&D or both. And I'm living for the fact that this is being borne out. True and reliable factual data here. You heard it first.
Yeah.
lot of trans people who do climbing or bouldering, and you know why? Trans people rock.
Hey.
So,
I think I remember someone bringing up, like, there's the reason why it's not the most competitive of sports, because most of the time it's, you see a rock, let's climb it. And there's not...
Let's climb it, yeah.
It's very tree climber energy of like, I think I could get that.
Or like the energy of a man who's driven to dig a hole on a beach. Anyway, so Kit says, well, if you want sports related, I went paddleboarding for the first time last week and I saw Magnus the Walrus.
Oh!
No further context is given.
Yeah. I love that. Go off, Magnus the Walrus. I love him. Yeah. That's great.
And Laura, Queen of Seagulls, has given us a screenshot that shows a run monitoring app saying that she's hit her second fastest 5K in all of 2026. So nice going. Always nice to get close to that personal best.
Nice. And Inchfoot says, I ran hard in school PE and now I decided to cycle 15 kilometers to the other side of city and back. Nice one.
Yeah.
Love that.
Cool. Definitely it's been leg day for you. Morwin says, I took my girlfriend Kaylee dancing and rock climbing, for the first time.
Yeah.
Yay, cute.
And next up, Hawk says, I have bench pressed 85 kilograms. I think that's more than I weigh. Without dropping the bar this week, which is my current record. Nice.
Sick. Subby Alex, moving away from the sporty ones now, says, having a rough week, but I'm still here and recently made level 79 in Pokemon Go, which took 400 kilometers walking while fighting depression. Actually, that is a sport. That's hell of a sport.
Yeah,
that's a fucking
absolutely a
endurance
sport.
feast, and I'm proud of you for doing that, because if I was depressed, I'm unlikely to move at all, let alone start walking.
Jane says, my girlfriend, also trans femme, proposed to me. And I, of course, said yes, been beaming ever since. Congratulations, Jane. That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
That's really wonderful.
Fed by Ravens, dressed as a student day. Dressed as a student day is kind of like trans joy during Halloween for teachers, because so many teachers will cross-dress that it's normal to wear whatever clothes you feel like while pretending to be a student. So today I'm able to dress as masculine as I want without drawing negative attention.
Oh, that's cool.
Take the wins where you can get them.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, but that's a vibe. It's quite funny. I like the idea that I'd turn up to school one day and all the teachers would be dressed as if they're students. That's quite funny. But then I'm imagining it as like they'd be
school
in like
uniform.
the yucky fleece and the sweaty polo shirts that they had in my fucking school. Yeah. Samantha Duke says, my partner has taken me on a little trip/vacation to celebrate Miss Kitty's first birthday, as she put it, aka a year since my bottom surgery. Congratulations. Happy for you. Have your wonderful time.
Yeah, that's good anniversary to have. Clickable Aran, no, I'm kidding. Link Aran says, I drove for 4 hours on a sunny weekend with the roof down to go to the queer bar I used to visit when I lived near Glasgow. I had a lovely evening and it was nice to be in a queer environment, even if it was just for one evening. Over the next few days, I went around Glasgow and visited my old neighbours as well. Yeah, sometimes it's nice. Sometimes you can go home again, you know?
Yeah.
Like go to a place you used to live, you know, see what's changed, what hasn't, and particularly if you're getting into a queer space, I just love queer spaces wherever they are, basically. More of those.
Yeah. Emily said, this is a small thing, I guess, lol, but I finally bothered to hang my trans flag back up in my room yesterday after taking it down for a protest in February. Nice.
Yay. Yes, I love it when people beat through the procrastination or the executive dysfunction, whichever one it is. I don't know if you've diagnosed. For me, it's always executive dysfunction.
Still figuring that one out.
I'm joking. There are times that you can procrastinate. I just, is it me again?
Maybe.
Oh, fuck.
It is indeed.
Terrible accounting in 3 today. Bella says, what things have brought me trans joy? I wish there were more choices, honestly, but the small things, like one of my Tesco delivery drivers always greeting me at the door with a "Hey, flower," that's cute.
Aww.
Dig that.
That's really,
Love
that's
that.
nifty, isn't it? Yeah. So Mimi says, hello, darling. Finally got my fringe back, and she's attached a photo. Super cute. Love it.
Yay.
Good fringe.
And Lily got gendered correctly at the polling station today. Yay!
Yes.
Woot. Yep, today as we record this, it is the 7th, so I've gone out and done a democracy, as have the partners, and I think Alyx has gone and done a... Yes, Alyx has a cool story from having gone out and done a democracy, actually, which we'll come back to. Obviously, by the time this episode comes out, we will know the results, but yeah, that dates it when we're recording this. We've gone out and done our duty to democracy. Helldiver salute.
I was about to say that's the Helldivers-like thing.
Alyx, you said you had a thing that you wanted to do for Trans Joy that was it sport related?
Oh, no, yeah, to be fair, it wasn't too much of it. It's a bit of an interesting one. So I've been volunteered to be put on a boat and do some photography for some sailing competitions or regattas coming up.
Nice.
Oh
wow, that sounds really cool. A regatta, that's like, those can be a big
those
deal.
I think there's 50 or 60 people out on the water at the same time. The day before, I'm being taught how to use a sailing boat, so I know what to look for when I'm on the water as well. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, Sea of Thieves won't help you out there.
No, it will not. And I'll give you one piece of advice. Do not drop your camera.
Oh, God, I hope not. I mean, I haven't even checked my camera's insurance for water damage yet. I should really do that.
Yeah,
definitely
and bring a
definitely
backup,
check
even
that.
if it's just a disposable. Like,
Maybe my phone. That's waterproof. Maybe I can put that
good
to
thinking. Also, Alyx, you told us a story earlier on about what happened when you went to the polling station. Please repeat that story now.
Exactly. I mean, on the theme of Flint wanting to do something about the reform, so I did my democratic duty. I went into the polling booth, I put in my vote, and as I walked out, I saw this really nice Lib Dem lady right next to the door, and she was like, "Oh, what have you voted for today?" Just we've got the exit poll data. So I said, I voted Lib Dem, and then turned and locked eyes at the reform guy just over the side and went, "Because I don't vote for fascists," and then walked off.
Nice. Mic drop, honestly, that's fucking iconic. Nicely done. There wasn't anybody at my polling station, apart from the people that were running the thing. There wasn't anybody representing each party outside of it, and certainly weren't any reform people. I think they know better than to surface in the centre of Manchester. So you can find us, of course, on Blue Sky, on the Instagram. Hang on, no, let me do it in the most old person way possible. Yes, you can find us on the Blue Skies and on the Instagrams.
And the TikToks.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Oh, God. I feel like someone's about to call an Xbox a Nintendo.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just
not a
thinking. Find a way
PlayStation.
to call it a Nintendo. Yeah. All right. So, yes, please do follow us on social media. You'll find a lot of what we do there. We've got another couple of really good articles coming out quite soon related to the topic of this very episode. And also, you can support us if you like. Obviously, we're not unbiased. We are very much on the side of trans people, but that...
Everything has a bias. That's the thing. The more that something claims to be totally unbiased, the more likely it is to be biased.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very nicely put. But basically, that was me trying to segue into saying, hey, support us on Patreon. So yes, please do subscribe if you can. Every little helps. It helps us, travel across the country to go to protests, to go to events. We recently travelled down from the north of the country to go to London to watch a play and interview Abigail Thorne and stuff like that we're able to do only because of the support of our generous patrons. So thank you so much if you do that, and please do consider it if you're able to. That's it from us. thank you all so much for listening, and we will speak to you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
See you next time. Bye.
Toodaloo.
This episode of What the Trans was written and produced by Alyx, Flint, Sammy, and Ashleigh, and presented by Ashleigh, Alyx, and Flint. It was edited by Amber Devereaux, with our opening theme music created by Wardsal Yui Kohlberg, and our episode thumbnail artwork created by Aboa Piers. We would especially like to thank our producer-level Patreons, who are Alexandra Lilly,
Andrea Brooks,
Anubis a Jackal,
Ariadne Pennell,
B Squared,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean,
Bernice Roust,
Bex the Mermaid,
Brandon Craig, hello darling,
Break the System,
Carly Silvers,
Cassius Adair,
Kellen York,
Claire Scott,
Clara Vulliamy,
Crazy Richard,
Cinder goes up,
Danielle Hardwick,
Dan Oblivion,
Dave Murphy,
D,
Dr. McGee,
Elizabeth Beth Anderson,
L Gray,
Ellen Meller,
M. Seth Brittain, M. Seth Brittain,
Eric Widman,
Erin Carlson,
Irresponsibility, Fiona Punchard,
Flute Punk, hello darling,
40 funny furries forever, fighting fascists,
yeah, Gostar,
George Simmons,
Georgia Holden Burnett,
Grabalicious,
Hazel Dust,
Heather Peterson,
Heidi Reardon,
Helen _
Imi,
Jem Hoskins,
Oh, John,
Can we keep the... Oh, because that's really funny. Jordan Starr,
Kai Lewin,
Karakan 12,
Katie Cox,
Katie Fenn,
Katie Reynolds,
Kiki T,
Laura Bailey,
Laura, Queen of Seagulls,
Lorna Nines,
Lee Downs,
Lentil,
Levi Hart,
Lex Phoenix,
Lanus,
Leah Story,
Melissa Brooks,
Melissa Harker,
Michael Jajor,
Mika,
Monsieur Squirrel,
Murgatroyd,
Moxafon. Yeah, that.
sorry, Naystrom,
Name,
That is brilliant. Anamida Anascans,
Now Art,
Needles and Threads,
Nick Ross,
Ontologically Unjust,
Asheen,
Patreon user,
Rebecca Prentice,
Ren,
Roberto DePrunk,
Root -1,
Rolls Absolute,
SAP,
Sabrina Artus,
Samantha Raven,
Sarah,
Selena BN,
Setcab,
Sean Phillips,
Siobhan Fergus Evans,
Sky Kalayan,
Sophie Lewis,
Stella,
Tanya B,
Ted Delphus,
The Socialist Party of Great Britain, 1904.
The Spelund,
Tig Slater,
Tin Roof,
Toby,
Trowan,
Ludovic Parsons.
Willow_tree. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Oh gosh, we've been recording for an hour and a half. Okay.
Oh, no.
This is going to be a chunky episode.